In this topic, we'll be talking about conflict resolution, which helps us further refine our XPDL results and output. So, conflict resolution refers to how we mitigate conflicts that arise in our different entity extraction rules when they match the same text. For example, we can have overlapping matches where one rule picks up wipers broke and another rule matches broke glass. Or the match might be windshield wipers in one of our rules and just windshield in another rule. And other times, two rules match the same exact thing. The problem with these matches here is that the output would display differently for each rule, so the system won't know which to use. So that's why conflict resolution in these situations is important. Now, let's take a closer look at an example. So, let's say we have the following text in our record. Advisor noticed front wipers streaking glass. And this rule here is what we've been working with to capture a car part, followed by the issue. So in this case, our rule will capture front wipers streaking glass. And the output attributes will be front wipers as the car part, followed by streaking, which is the issue. But what if we have records like these in our dataset? Technician found jammed cylinder in engine, or client reported peeling air conditioning buttons. Now in these two records, the issue is listed first, followed by the car part, so we need a rule to cover that. Now if we write a second rule called issue part to cover the previous example, what happens with our original text record? As you can see, we're now capturing streaking glass, where streaking is the issue and the part is now glass. In other words, our two rules are now overlapping. We see part of our first rule intersects part of the second rule, and we only want to keep one of these matches, in this case the first one. So let's see how we can do this with our entity extraction conflict resolution. Now, to illustrate how this is done, let's try some hands-on examples for handling conflict resolution. In this hands-on practice, we'll go over how to implement conflict resolution for our XPDL rules. Now, we're still working with our car repairs dataset, and we're trying to extract car parts and issues from the text. So let's go into the entity extraction node and look at our output. We see that our rule extracted car parts and issues here. But we notice that there's a conflict with our rules. We see that wipers streaking is captured from these two records, where the car part is wipers and the issue is streaking. But we also notice one of our other rules is capturing this as streaking glass, with the car part as glass instead. Now we want to only capture this one way, where the car part is wipers instead of glass. So we need to specify how PolyAnalyst should handle this conflict. To do this, let's go into the properties and select the conflict resolution tab. Now, to add a conflict resolution, we click the plus icon here, and we start filling out the information on the rules we need to resolve conflicts between. In this case, our conflict is in the car issue custom entity, so we put that as the name for both participant A and participant B. Next, we need to specify the rules. So in participant A, we'll put part issue as the rule, and in participant B, we'll put issue part. Okay, now that we've specified the rules, let's establish the conditions for conflict resolution down here. We just click the plus sign icon to add a condition, and then we can click on the condition and choose A intersects partly B from the dropdown. Next, we need to add an action by clicking the plus sign over here and choosing Keep A from the dropdown. This means that when there's a partial overlap in the rules, the system will keep the match where the part is listed first. Okay, now let's click Refresh to implement this conflict resolution. And we'll click OK when we get this warning message here. Now, let's go back to the results. And we see that we now only see the wipers streaking match in our results output. Great. So this method works fine when we have just 2 rules. But in many cases, we have multiple rules to apply this to. So we'd have to create a conflict resolution for every rule pair, and this is just not that efficient. So if we know that one rule is always more accurate than the others, and maybe another one of our rules is a little more accurate than a third rule, we may want to use the confidence attribute in our rule and set the confidence values to rank the rules for conflict resolution. In other words, we're telling PolyAnalyst to choose the higher confidence value rule if 2 or more rules match the same text. Now, this confidence value is essentially our best guess of how accurate a rule is. So we're basically choosing the value based on our personal evaluation of the rule's accuracy. So let's go over an example of how this works. Let's go into this other version of the entity extraction node we have here. Now, we see that the conflicts have been resolved, but let's see how it was done. So let's click on the Properties and view the Rules Editor tab. Now, you'll see that each rule in this entity here lists a confidence value. And if we go to the Conflict Resolutions tab, we can see how it's set up. Okay. So we notice that we only need to specify the name of the entity. And for the actions, when A intersects partly B, we see that the selection is set to keep higher confidence. So in cases where the 2 rules conflict with each other, it'll keep the one with the higher confidence. Now that we've gone over how to resolve conflicts between XPDL rules, let's talk about what we can do if we have conflicts between entities instead of rules. So we'll go back to the slides for that. Now, in our hands-on practice, we had to resolve conflicts between 2 rules. But what happens when we have to resolve conflicts between 2 entities? So let's go back to our toothpaste survey example with strong taste. And let's look at a different way to deal with sentiment that's not captured properly. So we see here that strong taste is captured by our standard entities as a positive sentiment, but it's captured as a negative sentiment by our custom entities. And suppose we don't want to just exclude the standard rule from the results of an entity, but instead we want to make sure it's captured properly by a custom entity, which we create to adjust the sentiment analysis to our needs. So to handle this, we need to create a conflict resolution so that we keep the entity that's correct. So we put the standard entity as participant A and the custom entity as participant B. Now, you'll notice that there's nothing listed in the rules box for either of these, because we're working with different entities instead of rules inside the same entity. Now, our condition we need to select at the bottom is that if A equals B, or in other words, if we have the same match, that we want to keep B, which is our custom entity. Now, some of you may be wondering, what is this asterisk after the entity names? So the reason for the asterisk is that we use it as a wildcard. This way, we don't have to write out each instance where a custom entity overrides the standard entity. And this is a really nice trick to make this conflict resolution apply to all entities in both the standard and custom categories, especially if we have a lot of entities that this would apply to. So once we apply the conflict resolution, we see that only our negative custom entity captures the sentiment of strong taste. And this concludes our topic on conflict resolution. In our next topic, we'll go over the basics of XPDL macros to avoid writing repeated queries in our XPDL rules.